In this lesson, we'll build on our knowledge and we'll learn how to draw a simple box mannequin. Great, so let's get started. So just to review quickly, now we're thinking of all our objects that we draw as having 3 dimensions, inhabiting a 3D space and having an X, Y, and a Z. How can we actually use that to draw people? So firstly, we're going to go over what not to do, because that's a great place to start, because then you know what you're trying to avoid, you can work towards something and identify what you want. So I'm going to start out by drawing an example of some anatomy, some figure drawing, the way that most people learn, and just highlight some of the problems with that. For starters, people tend to just take it too seriously. Try and make it really academic and learn every muscle name, every bone. We can just keep it quite relaxed. We're going to be simplifying things. That's one of the main elements of this course, is how can we simplify it right down into something that's understandable and easy to remember. And even as I'm drawing this example of what not to do, I'm still thinking about the basic elements that we covered in the first lesson of overlap and sides. You see here, I'm adding in some overlap. And there's nothing wrong with learning these anatomical forms, and it will help you in the long run, but just for this course, let's just keep it as basic as possible. What we're going to be doing is translating our knowledge now of boxes and 3D forms and learning how to draw a simple box mannequin. We'll just draw this skeleton out as reference so we can use him for scale. Again, thinking about overlap, I want to draw in the arm behind. The natural tendency is to want to draw it out here somewhere, but let's make sure it's tucked behind and increase the level of overlap, which will increase the amount of form. I won't carry on, I'll just leave that as it is, but we'll just cover why we don't want to be drawing like this. If you look at the complexity of this shape and these forms, yes, they do have that feeling that we spoke about, that you could reach out and you could pick it up, which is great. And that is what we're going for, but it's incredibly difficult to imagine, visualize these shapes and sort of rotate them in your mind and turn them around. And one thing that you can do with a cube form is turn it around. You can imagine it turned on its side in a way that you just can't really do with something as complex as a skeleton. So that's one reason not to draw like that. Another reason is that the more detail you add, the more inclined to add more details you'll be. Once you've learnt the skeleton, then people start to think, I should add all the muscles on as well. And I'll add in all these trapezius and deltoids and all the things that it's great to know, but they're not essential to learn. And you can become quite uptight adding all those things on, and you can take all the fun out of drawing. Just relax a little bit and enjoy it. And the whole reason that we're drawing is to enjoy it. And that's why you drew as a child. And I just try and maintain that as an adult as well. That's an example of something not to do. So how can we use our knowledge of form to draw a box mannequin? And how can we use something? How can we take away some useful information from this sort of thing? Let's start off with something like this. And rather than a complex skull like that, let's just have a cube form. That's all it needs to be. If you imagine it's been squashed from the sides, so it's a little bit narrower than it is wide. We'll just do a cylinder for the neck. And that cylinder can be flexible, which allows you to move your head around, and it can have a little bit of squash and stretch in it. We'll draw another simple form as a box for the chest, which represents the whole rib cage. We'll just do a cylinder, look like this, but it's got flat ends. And then for the pelvis, or the waist region, another box form, but rather than keeping it shaped like that, we'll just taper it slightly. Thinking about our three sides, this isn't the shape of it, this is the shape of it, and I've made sure that it has A, B, C, three different sides, so it looks like a 3D thing. The legs can be really simple, 2 cylinders. One of my main tips for figure drawing is introduce an element of taper into all of your limbs. They do taper a lot more than you think, and when you feel your own shoulders or the top of your thighs, the difference in width between those and your shins and your wrist is huge. We're not going for this. We're going for something like this. See how it's tapering in the sides. So we'll use that on the arms as well. And I want to draw the arm on the other side. I'm thinking about overlap. Natural tendency will be to want to draw it here in this shape. Remember, it's going to be tucked behind. So if I was drawing through it, you could see through that chest form. You would see that it would be behind there. And you maybe would only see the elbow and a little bit of the forearm. So that overlap rule is really important. Finish off the legs, so 2 tapering cylinders. And I've included here balls for the knees and the elbows and the ankle joint. And then for the feet, even more simple, just a flat form. Another rule to remember, which is really, really helpful, is that just less is more. We've seen that already several times when I've been drawing out these examples. I'm always thinking about it, I'm always asking myself, how can I draw less? That's great because it means you don't have to do as much work, but it's also good because it means your drawing will look more believable and have more form. A quick example of that. People will want to draw the chest and the arms like this. Let's just remember less is more. Draw exactly the same size. But when I draw this next arm, the one that's behind, I want to show less of it. I'm also drawing fewer lines. That's really just one line rather than these. You can see how that looks a lot more 3D than the one above because we've drawn less. So try less hard and less is more. One thing I would like to just address quickly is when you draw a box mannequin like this, people tend to get really uptight and sort of hung up on rules. Things like how many heads tall is the figure? How many heads fit into one chest form and things like that. I actually just don't think that's worth worrying about at all. The best check that you can do when you draw is just this. Just drawing it on paper, and you can go in and you can measure everything really, really carefully, and you can ask yourself, oh, does this figure have, is it 8 heads high and things. The best thing to do is just trust your eyes and come back here. Take a step back and actually step away from your drawing and look at the drawing as a whole, rather than sort of zooming in at all the tiny little details that you're seeing. And this is why I say you don't draw the skeleton, because you're obsessing about details and bones and things like that. Instead, just stand up, take a step back, and have a look at the image as a whole. Usually it will be obvious what's wrong. You notice things like that. You notice those obvious mistakes that you won't notice if you're in here and you're looking here and you're looking at all the muscles that you draw. So we'll keep it really, really simple and remember to step back. So far we've covered the simple box mannequin, less is more, take a step back, and finally we're just going to talk a little bit about proportions. And again, I don't have any hard and fast rules for this. I think you should trust your eyes. I'll just show you a couple of examples of how you can vary the proportions and really make an object look recognizable without adding anything. And I'm thinking, I want to draw the arm behind here. I mean, I've been drawing for 15 years and I still want to draw the arm out here. I have to just remind myself, don't do it. Don't show as much. It will look better if I don't show as much. I'm thinking of the taper that we spoke about before. We're also looking at the proportions. So if I were to draw this mannequin out, I could ask you, what physical type does that person look like? Maybe what gender? Obviously, there are no hard and fast rules, but there are tendencies towards certain things. And generally speaking, if you draw a narrower waist and wider hips, so that ratio is different, it will look a lot more feminine than drawing something more like this, where you make the waist around the same width as the bottom of the ribs, and you draw more boxy hips like that. You see this very similar width. That already starts to look more masculine. We haven't added anything, there's no haircuts, there's nothing, all the extra details that people really want to add. One thing I have done though is I've added in some taper here, and the chest is tapering up like a Dorito shape. You add on some slightly larger arms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shapes. That already looks like it's going to be a man. So proportion is really, really powerful, and we'll speak about it more in the next lesson, but proportion and silhouette go hand in hand in helping you identify something. So that's it. So in this lesson, we've covered how to draw the simple box mannequin. In the next lesson, we're going to move on to how to draw the advanced mannequin.